The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 16th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' body. And very early, on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So the women went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. They were very afraid, and they said nothing to anyone, because the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
This is probably my favorite version of the Easter morning story from all the Gospels, because it is so believable. I can believe the women went to the tomb to do what they could when they didn't know what to do. This is the way the grieving act. I can believe they went not knowing how they would move the stone away. This too is the kind of thing the grieving do. I do believe they did not find a body, and that they talked to an unidentified man who gave them a message to go to Galilee as Jesus had told them before he died. And I can believe they instead went home afraid and said nothing, at least for a while. Because I can imagine when one first learns that the dead don't necessarily remain dead, you might need to take a minute to ponder that news. The ending of Mark's gospel may not make me comfortable, but it does ring true. It rings true in the same way that a short piece by Langston Hughes, a poet, a playwright, a fiction writer, and an essayist, captured his not seeing Jesus in a piece called Salvation. It begins like this. "I was saved from sin when I was going on 13, but not really saved. It happened like this. There was a big revival at my Auntie Reed's church. Every night for weeks there had been much preaching, singing, praying, and shouting, and some very hardened sinners had been brought to Christ, and the membership of the church had grown by leaps and bounds. Then, just before the revival ended, they held a special meeting for children, quote, to bring the young lambs to the fold, unquote. My aunt spoke of it for days ahead. That night, I was escorted to the front row and placed on the mourner's bench with all the other young sinners who had not yet been brought to Jesus. My aunt told me that when you were saved, you saw a light and something happened to you inside. And Jesus came into your life. And God was with you from then on. She said you could see and hear and feel Jesus in your soul. I believed her. I had heard a great many old people say the same thing, and it seemed to me they ought to know. So I sat there calmly in the hot, crowded church, waiting for Jesus to come to me." The story goes on to describe young Langston Hughes sitting in that sinner's bench with other youth, as one by one all the other youth stood up and said, "I see Jesus." The whole congregation applauded. The singing began again. The young redeemed sinner was brought forward, and everyone cheered. Alleluia! By the end of the story, the only one left in the sinner's bench is Langston Hughes, and he's perplexed. He's perplexed because the last child to claim to see Jesus was a friend of him whom he knew had not seen Jesus, and whom he suspected had said he had seen Jesus just to get out of sitting in the sinner's pew. And now that put all the pressure on young Langston. Ultimately, young Langston gives in as well, stands up, says he sees Jesus. Everyone praises God, proclaiming, "Alleluia." The singing begins again, and there is light and love and warmth all around. That night, when he is in bed, his aunt hears him crying softly. She believes he is crying because of his encounter with the Holy Ghost. But in fact, he is crying because he knows he lied to his aunt and to the whole church, because in fact, he had not seen Jesus. And because he didn't see Jesus, he no longer has hope that Jesus will come and help him. And this sums up where the church finds itself today. How do we help those who have lost hope because they have not seen Jesus? Or how do we admit that we too haven't seen Jesus? But we have seen and experienced resurrection, and so we have come to believe. And while this may be Mark's ending, clearly this is not the end of the story. Just as the crucifixion threatened to be the end, but was not the end, so the resurrection seems at first to be the end, but is not the end. The story continues. You might as well rip the cover off the back of your Bible, because even that is not the ending. The story of God's love and relationship with God's beloved people is still being written, except that now it includes the resurrection. Emerson B. Powery wrote in his book, True to Our Native Land, "As descendants of the enslaved, we too understand how some stories do not end with simplistic conclusions, as if things were happily ever after." And I would add to that, once we know what is possible in terms of human suffering, fear like that which caused the women at the tomb to go home and say nothing for a while, becomes a bit of a constant companion. In 2021 USA, there are mass shootings all the time. Our government is horribly and dangerously at odds with itself. Our Capitol Police are being sacrificed by domestic extremists. We have fear around our own personal finances, the health and well-being of our children, and whether we will be the next city to find lead in our drinking water. These are just a few of our fears. We aren't told what the man at the tomb told the women who came there early in the morning not to be afraid of, but we can guess. Was it the fact that there's some random guy sitting at the tomb, or that their beloved leader died and now his body is gone, or that those who killed Jesus might now be looking for his friends? The truth is that good news that is also life-changing is always scary. You get a new job, a long-awaited for position. You've been out of work a while, but it requires you move across the country, leaving your family and friends and all that is familiar, and that is scary. You get into a new relation that promises love and companionship. And that means that you also risk being hurt, maybe for the first time, maybe for the 10th. And that's scary. Someone you love, whose side you had been beside for years, begins to suffer horribly. When their suffering finally ends and they die, it is good news, for with it comes a sense of relief. But now, you have to walk back into your life without them, and that is scary too. Now, let's look again at the news of this day, the resurrection of Jesus. As gospel writers Matthew and Luke write it, they had Mark's gospel in front of them. They wrote their accounts, which include more angels, more characters, and way more Jesus. Apparently, they thought, wait a minute, after reading Mark's. We can't leave it like this. We have to tell more resurrection stories. We have to finish the job. But Luke and Matthew's accounts don't change Mark's, which ends with the women saying nothing to anyone. They were afraid because. Now, if you look this up, most Bibles turn the phrase around so that it reads, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. But even that is more than most Bible scholars believe was in the original manuscript. The most authoritative sources say no. It ends with them saying nothing to anyone because. Crazy, right? So unsatisfying. Mark ends with this cliffhanger, save for a command from an unidentified man, telling the women to go back to the beginning, go back to where it all started, go back to Galilee, there you will see him. Lamar Williamson has this to say in his commentary on Mark. He writes, I think sometimes we don't get caught up in the story of Easter enough. We sanitize the story. The women are surprised about the stone being moved, but they wouldn't have been shocked to find the decomposing body of Jesus because that's what they expected to find. If the ending was that Jesus' 3 days dead body was there, we would be similarly shocked because we know that to be a follower of Jesus is to know that God brings life out of death, even after a year of record-breaking and heartbreaking death from COVID-19. Life is now rising up in the number of people who've been vaccinated and the rapidity with which people are being vaccinated. Children who were separated from their parents at the border this time last year have been reunited. There is life in knowing that while our church buildings have been closed for worship, they have been converted to Red Cross blood donor stations. The church has increased its capacity to feed and shelter people. People who felt shut out of the church because of their schedule or their inability to get to a church or their concern that they would not be accepted in the sanctuary have become part of faith communities online. It's an odd thing because it almost robs Easter of its power, which is too bad because in this moment the world has completely changed and it is terrifying. We who have lived through a year of unanticipated ongoing change understand how even when the news is good and life-changing, it's still scary. And the truth is, both the world and the church need this scary transformation. This Easter, I invite you to lean into the ways in which this world has not yet been transformed as it needs to be by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is uncomfortable to think about that, but it's no longer optional. Resurrection doesn't undo the crucifixion. It doesn't negate the pain and the wounds. The wounds are deep. The resurrection of Jesus is so much more than a wardrobe change. And the church needs to own this, because until we acknowledge the deep wounds that still exist, wounds of racism, white supremacy, classism, wounds of the growing discrepancy between those who have and those who don't, the reality that when it comes to vaccine access on a world level, even that, the United States decided that AstraZeneca was not safe for us, but we were fine with the rest of the world using it. There's a variety of issues and inequalities that we continue to struggle with to this day, and many have been happening within our church buildings where we were really comfortable. I suggest we acknowledge the truth that Langston Hughes named in Not Seeing Jesus, and that is, we not use Easter as a day to pretend that resurrection has conquered death, love has won over hate, and everything is fine. Instead, let's use it as a day to tell the truth about the way Jesus' resurrection changed everything, and everything has not yet changed. Let's live into this ambiguous ending of Mark, which tells us that resurrection is not the end, it's the beginning. Because we have work to do if we really want to be transformed by the resurrection. The question for each of us to consider now is, are you going to move past your fear and meet Jesus back in Galilee where transformation begins? Or are you going to hide in the upper room? Or are you just going to go back to fishing? Easter is an invitation to you into a life of transformation. If we aren't interested in transformation, we don't need Easter. This is just an idle tale that happened 2,000 years ago. Of course the women were afraid. As church in the world, as we knew it, continues to change in such significant ways, we too are afraid. But it's important to remember that fear can either make you freeze or give you fuel. It can be liberating when we allow it to lead us towards something new, something better. Think of the fear you felt 1 year ago when there were so many unknowns compared to right now. What have you seen rise up because our church buildings, like the tomb, were empty? What have you seen rise up in your families, in your daily routines, because you went home and sat with your fear and looked carefully at what in your life needed to be transformed? In our community of faith, we now have Pastor Anna Taylor McCants, our new pastor of mission development. We are actively engaged in feeding people in a whole new way with the Fed Up food truck. We are in communities that need a little help rising. We are partnering with the Red Cross, hosting blood drives in the place we used to have Sunday school. We are collaborating and sharing resources with other churches and other faiths in ways that are allowing all of our clergy to feel supported and less alone. I want to close by suggesting that we actually follow the directions of the unidentified man at the tomb who sent the women to Galilee, the place this gospel and Jesus' ministry began. If we do this, the Easter story in the Gospel of Mark reads this way. Beginning with chapter 16, verse 5. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. He said to them, "Do not be alarmed, for you are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. To chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is where we enter the story. This is where life conquers death and transformation begins by love that rose up from the grave. This is where faithful people for centuries have found their fear converted into courage. Jesus rising is the beginning that enables us to rise too. We rise for the sake of a world in need. We rise because once death no longer has the last word, we, like all followers of Jesus who came before us, have much to say and do to proclaim the good news in word and deed. We rise because God lifting Jesus from the dead means we are lifted too in this world and the next.